Hello, everybody. Welcome to another edition of our Tech Talk series. This is Tony Battaglia with Freewave Technologies, and I will be moderating this session. Today's topic is environmental and social governance, or better known as ESG, which has become quite a growing topic of interest in the energy space. So if you're not familiar with ESG, you'll certainly learn quite a bit about it on this session. And there's also a pretty good deal of information available online as well. So we have a pretty diverse and great group of panelists today, so let's go around for some introductions.
Hello, my name is Michael Massey. Speaking of automation, my automatic lights went off. I am the Remote Automation Solutions Sales Manager for Vinson Process Controls out of the Louisville corporate office.
My name is Ryan Hetzer, testing with Vinson Process. I serve as the Business Development Manager for our North Texas, West Texas, and New Mexico customer base.
My name is John Pfeffer, and I'm a senior air quality professional for TriHydro Corporation. I'm located in their Golden, Colorado office.
Hi, my name is Greg Corey. How does my audio sound? I'm the Director of Support for Freewave, and I handle our pre- and post-sale technical support.
And I am John Strack. What, you're saying automation isn't perfect? And I'm the product line manager for software at Freewave, so our edge software platform, and also based in Colorado.
Right, fantastic. Well, let's get this kicked off. Are you seeing any examples where operators are installing systems and equipment to demonstrate that they're proactively managing their operations to limit emissions of vapors and greenhouse gases?
Yeah, we sure are. I think really beyond the regulatory requirement, there's been a trend in the industry toward these types of voluntary or proactive type emission reduction programs. Right now, we're beginning to see a push from some of the downstream gas purchasers, for example. An example might be an LNG company or a natural gas utility that purchases gas from the upstream operator or producer, and they're really requiring their producers to be able to demonstrate that their operations have lower emissions than, say, an average against their peers or an average in a basin. At TriHydro, we're also involved in some direct, voluntary emissions monitoring work for clients. We do direct measurement using air monitors and as well as using optical gas imaging cameras to check for leaks at facilities. And also doing some acoustic monitoring where we're using acoustical devices to look for leaks through a valve, for example, to try to minimize emissions at a site. Also starting to see operators install direct online flow measurement systems for tanks, storage tanks and compressor vents, for example, and seeing automated tank gauging systems go in to take the place of manual gauging through thief hatches on tanks and eliminating that as an emission source. Again, seeing that both on the regulatory side, but also seeing that in the voluntary application by some clients who don't have that as regulatory requirements today.
Fantastic. No, it's great to see folks taking the voluntary proactive measures to get the ball rolling on that front. On the flip side of the coin, what are some of the specific regulatory drivers that are currently in place for online monitoring of that equipment?
Generally seeing this at the state level, there are states that are promoting more electronic monitoring, but also electronic data management. Things such as automated tank gauging systems to eliminate use of thief hatches for that purpose. It'll eliminate that emission source and also eliminates the opportunity for an operator to accidentally leave one of those hatches open, which can be problematic from an emissions source perspective. Also seeing some regulatory trend toward fixed perimeter monitoring, kind of a new thing coming in Colorado, for example, but also elsewhere, to have fixed monitors at oil and gas production sites where they're looking to monitor with an array of fixed instruments and a meteorological station, looking to better understand what the emissions from those types of either pre-production and post-production operation activities of oil and gas well sites actually is relative to what might have been estimated from emissions factor basis in the past. And so that's being driven by regulation here and elsewhere, but also allows the operator to respond quickly should there be an emissions release event. These systems typically, use traditional SCADA systems to acquire the data and to manage that data and to communicate it either locally or to a more regional-based user, either whether it's a client that's needing that data or a community that data might be reported into. And I suspect we're going to see this come about at the federal level as well as time goes by.
Thank you for the detail there. So what considerations do the producers and the users take into account when trying to prove an ROI or a business case to move in this direction?
ROI is probably a tough nut to crack on that, but I think a business case can be made for this. In addition to the other items I mentioned before, I think we'll continue to see operators with a need to implement these approaches as part of what can be called the social cost of doing business. These ESG concepts are going to continue to grow in importance to them as operators, but also to their customers, as I mentioned, and to their investors. It's difficult to measure return on investment on these types of things, but I think employing ESG concepts is going to continue to be a critical factor going forward. Operators that can demonstrate their operations are lower in emissions, and in particular lower in greenhouse gas emissions, will not only see the economic benefit of keeping the product in the pipe, but they'll also be viewed as that operator that those downstream producers want to do business with. Essentially, we're looking at a greening of the entire supply chain upstream through transportation, downstream to sales, and demonstrating that a given operator is a desirable business partner.
Yeah, John, I think that's well said. I was going to mention, in these cases, there's tangible and intangible benefits.
Mm-hmm.
You mentioned keeping the product in the pipe. That's a tangible. Obviously, rather than paying a fine for an event or a flare event or getting paid for selling that product. Those things you can obviously put a pencil to easily, but there's other risks that can be mitigated. There's always safety risks, and it's hard to put a pencil to those, but those are real, and each company can evaluate that on their own efforts. But also there is the social license to operate, as you mentioned, being able to do business with different people, being able to do business in different areas based on how you are perceived in the environmental circles, how you treat the area, the people in that area, the world around you.
Mike, something you just brought up there, one of the many things was safety. So from the automation space, what implications would you say these solutions have on safety?
Well, John mentioned one when he was talking about keeping thief hatches closed. You want to protect your employees from harmful gases or vapors, so that may be present, but also slip, trip, and fall hazards. Just climbing up on tanks, even in good weather, can be dangerous. So the least or the more you can remove that type of operation, the better you are from a risk perspective and safety. Also, by adding things like the automatic tank gauging that was mentioned, and tracking some of your relief valves and thief hatches for open scenarios and venting scenarios, knowing what's taking place on that vessel, you can increase or decrease trips to site, which also is a big safety risk.
On that note, we've actually, when I have conversations with some of my producers out in West Texas, they discuss or they refer to their tank battery of the future as an unmanned site. Need to make sure that there's an understanding amongst the facilities engineers as well as the operators on the ground that we do need to make sure that the equipment is properly maintained. And beyond that, we've got devices specifically for flashback and flare flashback events, right? And continue to try to raise education and awareness of what is required. We just try to partner up the best we can to provide education training, whatever information may need to be shared in order to make sure that there's not a false sense of security. And at the end of the day, they can rest easy knowing that they are, properly protected or as well protected as they can be.
Very good. Thank you, guys. So a lot said so far, a lot of very specific use cases, but I guess taking a step back and going a little bit more high level, what are some of the other areas where automation can support some of these ESG improvements, initiatives, and goals?
I'd say that each case is unique because of equipment that's installed, the age of the equipment, the type of the equipment that's used. There's different scenarios that come into play, we've had practical experience working through almost every scenario, from the different lower ounce tank setups like 6-8 ounce tanks, now moving to 16 ounce, preventing to tankless sites, and how those interact and how the equipment needs to be set up to make sure that those function properly so that you don't have downtime, but you receive the benefits of a site that is zero emission capable.
I want to add on to that from Freewave's perspective. The role that we play in these systems is that we have all this data that's stranded out in the field, and that data needs to be retrieved somehow. When you're dealing with field operations that have assets scattered across a large geographic area, sometimes there might not be fiber there. Maybe there's no cellular coverage from Verizon or AT&T. So Freewave, for the past 26 years or so of our existence, has been providing that communication to bridge that gap in order to retrieve that data that's stranded in the field. Because when we're talking about ESG goals, you have to define what your goal is, and then it has to be measurable. And then you have to have a way to retrieve that data in order to compare that against your goal to see, if you're being effective in meeting that specific goal. So that's been a key focus for Freewave, is bridging those communication gaps.
A lot of good points brought up there. We're naturally migrating toward the data discussion, which is a big element of this discussion. So just naturally, we're talking about adding more equipment in the field, getting additional data points. With more equipment comes a bigger need for data, and poses a lot of complications when trying to pull meaningful data, especially when in remote and environmentally hazardous locations. How can that data help with reporting and compliance? Are there any regulations specifically on data?
We do see some of those requirements within the regulations at a state level. So we do see that as a requirement in various locations. The data is important for a lot of reasons, not just the reporting aspect of it, but that is one key aspect. Operators want to be compliant; they must follow the regulatory requirements, whatever those may be. But I think the accuracy and consistency of that data, the ability for it to be consistently reported, is somewhat critical here. A lot of these locations for oil and gas facilities are remote, don't have, in some cases, really very reliable electrical supply, but also communication being a major challenge for that. But the automation and instrumentation can drive accuracy and validity of the data, which is important to regulatory agencies for sure. I think it's also critical that, as I had mentioned before, some of the other drivers that are non-regulatory are actually requirements for operators to be able to certify their emissions intensity, so that end users understand what that carbon intensity is. It's become a point of measure across the industry and a point of importance to those end users. If you don't measure it accurately, you can't rely on that data to be used effectively. Many in industry are really focused at this time on how do I go after and achieve emission reductions? And your ability to measure accurately and automate controls such that you're able to manage those emissions properly can be critical in your ability to have real reductions, which is key to this whole concept of ESG. You must be able to measure it in order to be able to reduce it. I think we are seeing the shift away from what would maybe be a historical emission factor based estimation approach to real-time measurement, continuous measurements as being the approach that's expected now, and will be the approach used utilizing instrumentation, direct measurement, and direct reporting, real-time reporting.
Yeah, I think that's the great thing about the edge software trend from a data perspective, is that you can get that data that was stranded before now at a lot higher resolution, a lot faster, even if there are remote data collection problems. So, I think from the software perspective, and I'm the software guy, there's a lot of benefits being provided to the operation from having the edge software available, and therefore making the data available too.
How can folks migrate from a very traditional model where the data has been less, data requirements have been less intensive than what we're talking about right now, to a model where we see some big increases and improvements on how data is collected, distributed, and reported?
Yeah, I think from the transition perspective, the idea of fully changing up a data operation to be edge-based is sometimes pretty overwhelming, but it doesn't have to be. You can certainly start small with a few sites and get your new system in place in parallel to keeping your existing data collection and SCADA system in place. So the edge system doesn't have to take over on day one. You can get it working how you need before scaling it out. So I think a transition to make it easier for the producers and customers is definitely possible.
Yeah, I think that a lot of the information that's being collected is being managed in the field by a controller, in our case, an RTU, remote terminal unit that's out there doing computations, managing I/O for safety systems, and doing local measurement. What's collecting that data? And then you have an edge device like the Zoom IQ product from Freewave would talk to that RTU, collect all of the data from that site, and evaluate it against criteria so that you don't overwhelm your SCADA system with data. And then send the data that it needs to. What's changed in the last 5 minutes, or send me the average over the last 5 minutes, or if it exceeds a certain boundary, send me that piece of data. But don't flood me with every piece of data unless it's changed and I want to know about it. So you have access to real-time data, you have access to high-speed data, but you're only seeing the changes. And so in that way, it can interface with a legacy SCADA system very effectively. But you want to be collecting that data and putting it into a data lake somewhere so you can analyze it, look for those patterns, those clusters of things that are happening to evaluate, what other opportunities you have to improve your process, to be more responsible and be more efficient as an operator.
ESG really is the next step in that. It's not only are we caring about the well-being of our employees, but are we looking over the health of our environment, over the health of our community? It's taking a kind of a broader approach to safety, not just the individual, but society overall. So probably over the next 20 years or so, you're going to see a focus on how those things affect overall the communities we serve, not just the individual safety.
These global producers have all adopted these far-reaching future goals. They want no carbon footprint by 2050. And so you're throwing that goal out there, and now you're challenging your team. How are we going to get there? What are the avenues that we need to take to become better environmental stewards? And lots of outside the box thinking, right? I mean, it's well beyond just let's get a tighter thief hatch, right? There's layers upon layers. Right now, we're looking at pilot operated technology that's essentially bubble tight, right? As a means to replace the thief hatch. So systemically, things will change. We've got folks who are entertaining the idea of going flareless at the tank site, right? So how can we capture that gas that's being produced or separated that would typically go to sales? How can we get that back in the ground as opposed to going to flare if the midstream company happens to go down? There's lots of really interesting concepts that are getting kicked around, and it's exciting.
Well, thank you everybody for joining this edition of our Tech Talk. Thank you to all the panelists for chiming in and contributing here. We feel like this was a very strong and productive conversation. If anybody in the audience has any questions, feel free to reach out to any of us directly, and we'll be sure to continue the conversation with you. Thank you.